Good morning and welcome to another Seize the Day. Today is Monday, March the 3rd. Can you believe that? Monday, March the 3rd. Can't believe that we're already moving on and all of this is heading towards spring. Isn't that that's a really cool thing. Can't wait for some of the snow to go, but it's still here in pretty full force. So hey, all last week, I surprised my wife, and I got online and I found this great deal for just a 3 day last minute deal to go to Puerto Rico. And so I told her on Sunday, and we were leaving at 6 o'clock in the morning on Monday. And so I had put together some of the seize the days that I was going to do while I was away, and when we got down to Puerto Rico, we were near the ocean, and there was no internet, and something had happened on some of the grid that was down there, and so I didn't have any internet, and I couldn't find a place that had public internet where I could just do my thing. So I really apologize for that, and my wife says that was probably God's providence, so that we could, just spend the days together, which was fine. But and so we had a great time, and it was warm, 87 degrees. So we're glad I took that little trip. She starts back to work on Thursday, so it's been 6 weeks that she's been kind of recuperating here. So just good to get out. Um, I I can't believe this, but we are in week 18 of Casket Empty, and the week 18, as I'm putting this down here, it's about the walls being rebuilt and a covenant being restored. And this is part of the last week, and so I'm just going to put this up on the screen for you. Week 18, the walls of Jerusalem that had been torn down are about to be rebuilt. And I thought that what we would do is maybe just take a moment. And what I'd like to do is just bring you to some of this last closing bit of history. If you have your timeline, one of the things I'd like to do for you here is just begin to go through some of these last moments in the story as we find it unpacking itself in this one section now called the temple. It's around 539 BC. We've already seen how the Babylonians have destroyed Jerusalem back in 586 BC, and now it's almost it's closing in on 70 years later, as God had promised, and the Israelites are going back into their promised land. And in going back into their land, what we find is there's a whole number of some history that is going to be unpacked for us. So it begins really with back in 539, Cyrus, who is now the king of the Persian Empire. He defeats Babylon, and there is this whole scene of the writing on the wall, which shows the defeat that's going to take place here. 539, Cyrus is now decreed. He comes out and he allows the Israelites to go back into their land. So that's how Israel, that has been taken out of the land by Israel was taken out of the land by Babylon, and now they are being brought back under the Persian rule. And here's a map that just basically shows the extent of the Persian Empire. You could see it goes all the way over towards India, all right, on your map, consumes all of Babylon and what was formerly Assyria, right, going as far north as the Black Sea, right, up near Turkey, well, present day Turkey, up that way, comes all the way down, takes over all the promised land, and extends even out into Egypt. So the Persian Empire really became a dominant player at this period of time, and their reign was for through quite a number of different kings. So in 538 BC, that was the first return under the governor of Judah, and the temple begins under Zerubbabel and Joshua the high priest. But there is a lot of opposition that takes place. So Zechariah is one of those books that you will read. He's a prophet, right? It's one of the closing books of your New Testament. And he speaks about this branch, right? That will build God's temple, and that God's people will dwell as his people, you know. And so consequently, what you begin to find is Zechariah begins to give you this vision of what is going to come. Perhaps in your memory, this idea of this royal branch begins to stick out just a little bit for you, because what you will discover is that branch is referred to back in the prophecy of Isaiah, where, remember, God says that the time is coming when he's going to cut down the tree of Israel. And he says he's going to leave them like a lifeless stump. But then he goes on to say that out of that lifeless stump, God is going to raise a branch, a royal branch of David's line. And that's what you see being referred to here in the book of Zechariah. So now we get down to about 516 BC. And in 516 BC, the temple is rebuilt. The sacrifices now are being offered, but there is really no, there is no evidence of God's glory ever returning back to to this temple. Remember, in the book of Ezekiel, we're told how the glory of God left the temple. And even though this temple is being rebuilt, sacrifices are being offered, but it doesn't seem like God inhabits that space as he had done previously. And that's pretty telling. So now we go to 458 BC, and it's time for the second return from the exile during the reign of Artaxerxes. During this period of time, you begin to realize that, okay, the first return comes in, they begin to do this work, they're establishing themselves in the land, they begin to rebuild this temple. God raises up a prophet like Haggai, and Haggai is beginning now to speak into the lives of these people. They had put God's work on hold, and under Haggai, God reminds them again, saying, "Hey, listen, is it time for you to dwell in your paneled houses while my house lies in ruin?" And so they become, challenged again, and they start to rebuild this temple. Ezra, the scribe and a priest, he also returns to Jerusalem. And what's interesting is under his reign, the people become a little bit more receptive to the hearing of the word of the Lord. Now, during this time, we also find that Nehemiah is a cupbearer of the Persian king Artaxerxes. And in 445 BC, he returns to Jerusalem. And what does he do? But he rebuilds the walls of the city. And there is a time of prayer that is designated, and people gather together. And so under Nehemiah and his return, we begin to see how God is beginning to do this. Malachi then becomes the last Old Testament prophet. That's the last book in your Old Testament, and it's all about the Lord's coming and how that has been delayed due to the sins of the people, right? As we're seeing here, and so there's all these announcements that are being made. But what I want to share with you here, right, is that the that we also find during this period of time there are a number of these books that are being written, and so I thought it would be helpful for you and me to sit down and now just take a look at the end. So let me just give you one more little overview here, right? The people under Persia, they're allowed to go back into their land. And under Persia, it didn't all happen in one shot. There were waves of these exiles that were beginning to come back. They first come back, and we read how Persia allows them to re-inhabit their land and gives them all that they need to rebuild this temple. You read that from Ezra, right? And then you find that a period of time goes by, they begin this work, but then the work gets stalled. So God raises up a prophet named Haggai. So Ezra begins to bring them in. Haggai begins to revitalize the work, and Nehemiah comes in afterwards and then starts to rebuild the temple walls itself. And so, one of the things I thought I would do is just talk to you a little bit about, about who this, who Nehemiah is, and answer some of the questions that are in your book, your Bible study book. And so we will spend a little bit of time this week just beginning to look at what's taking place in these closing days. And then we'll finish up looking at the book of Malachi, because Malachi is the last of the Old Testament books, and it's beginning to point ahead to the coming of the Messiah. One last thing before we begin to concentrate on Nehemiah. This Saturday, we have the New Testament portion of our study. We're going to be initiating that. We have as our guest Dr. David Palmer, who wrote the second part of the study, which is using the acronym EMPTY. So EMPTY, you will discover, stands for expectations. It talks about that period of time from the end of Malachi to the Gospel of Matthew. It's about 400 years. And so we look at what's going on in those 400 years under that heading of expectations. Then there is the Messiah coming, all those birth narratives that you read about in Matthew and in Luke about, the angels coming, the choir singing, right? All, the wise men showing up, like all these stories about the Messiah being revealed to Israel. And then there is this day of Pentecost that comes, and we read about that and the teachings of Jesus. And the Y stands for yet to come. All these promises that God has made, to us and for us. So it's going to be pretty exciting. So Saturday we have this seminar, and if you're anywhere near Bethany Church, we invite you to come. It's going to be a great time. We'll get all of the materials that you need for the next part of our study. There is a timeline, there's a map, there's a Bible study guide, and there's also a commentary that you can get that will go along with the studies. All of that is included in the seminar price. You could also find all of these materials on casketempty.com if you're unable to come to the seminar, and just look for all the New Testament resources that you can find there. And it will also be listed on our bethanychurch.com. So if you get on bethanychurch.com, you'll get all the information you need for the seminar. You can register online and find out about all the material that you'll need for this next part of our study. I'm really excited. This has been a really good way for us to get an understanding of what is going on. Well, let me begin talking to you a little bit about Nehemiah chapter 1. In your study, it talks about in our Bible study questions. It talks about Nehemiah, and it talks about this change of heart that came on Nehemiah. And so, what I'd like to do is just in a few moments here, just tell you a little bit about this burden. Jerusalem, as we know it, was a city that had been, just overrun, right? And the walls of Jerusalem were broken down. Its gates had been burned with fire. The city still bore the marks of death and defeat. And yet, after his initial assessment, Nehemiah, he prays, he asks God, to open some doors so he can go back, so his people no longer have to live in this disgrace. And God answers that prayer and gives him favor with the king of Persia, whose name is Artaxerxes. And the king allows Nehemiah to go back. And not only does it allow him to go back, but you read in chapter 2 of Nehemiah, right? That and this is all about the walls being rebuilt, right? And this covenant that's going to be restored once again with Israel. But Nehemiah shares in chapter 2 of Nehemiah, he says, "Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace." And so the work begins with a whole lot of excitement. But here's the problem. Nehemiah, from the very beginning now, is going to have to contend with all of this external kind of opposition. So in Nehemiah, if you have your Bibles open, you could turn to Nehemiah chapter 2 and verse 19. So in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 19, it says, when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite, right, and Geshem the Arab heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. So this was the initial reaction of those who were in the occupying territories that were surrounding Israel at the time. So Sanballat, this gentleman called Tobiah, Geshem, right, from the Arabs, and men of Ashdod. Ashdod is all the way over on the coastline of the Mediterranean. It's current day where the Gaza Strip is right now, and all the conflict, between Israel and the warring, terrorist groups down there. So this is a picture now of all these surrounding officials who, by the way, are all under Persia rule, but they don't want Israel to rebuild its walls. It says here in chapter 4, and look at verses 7 and 8. It says, when they heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. And they plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. So you see what I'm saying? Like here are these officials from the surrounding regions. They have no interest in Israel coming back and being resituated in this land. It's interesting how times just don't change, right? It's always going to be the same till the day the Lord comes back. But Nehemiah's response is he counters that external opposition by speaking to the people and making sure that they are prepared. But it's not enough that Nehemiah had to encounter just the external opposition. Nehemiah is also going to encounter internal opposition. And what do I mean by that? Well, stay here in Nehemiah chapter 4, and now look at verse 10. It said, meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out, and there's so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. So you notice here, their strength is giving out. It says people are tired. And not only are they tired, they're saying this is in such disrepair. There's so much rubble. He's saying, how are we ever going to rebuild this? So you can begin to see that in that state of being tired, they become despairing. They're just overwhelmed. I don't know if you've ever felt like that. I remember one time as a kid growing up, we had our basement flooded out, and all of my mom's pictures, all the albums, all the stuff that you just store down in your basement sometimes. Well, it was all destroyed. And my mom, she was devastated. No more pictures, right? All this history just gone. And I remember after that going down in that basement, getting all that water out, and then just looking at the absolute mess and just feeling like, where do you even start? Everything needed to be taken out. There was so much, rubbish now. You got tired just looking. And so I can imagine on the city scale, right? It's probably how people feel like in Ukraine, right? Or in Palestine right now. They look and they're like, how are you ever going to make sense of this? How are you even going to start? But then when you add to this, notice here in verse 11 of Nehemiah chapter 4, it says, our enemies said, before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them and will kill them and put an end to the work. So not only are they tired, and not only are they on the verge of despair, but now they're fearful for their life. That threat that was uttered about them coming and stirring trouble, it's saying it here again, right? We're going to come. We're going to sneak up on them. We're going to kill them. We're going to put an end to this work. And so they so internally now, the people are kind of they're ready to just stop. They don't have an appetite for this. But notice what Nehemiah does. In verse 19 of chapter 4, Nehemiah says this. He says, so we continued to work with half the men holding spears from the first light of dawn till the stars came out. And at that time, I also said to the people, have every man and his helper stay inside Jerusalem at night so that they can serve as guards by night and workmen by day. So what he does is he posts guards, right? He says, look, it's not enough that I want you to go out here and work, with a shovel, right, to rebuild, but I also want you to carry a spear, right? So with your weapon in hand and the shovel in the other hand, we're going to divide this up. So while one people are working, the other people are standing guard, right? And I want you all inside Jerusalem. We'll put guards so that you guys could get some rest before the work begins. But we're not stopping. You see, that's what a good leader does, right? A good leader is trying to move people to do what they don't want to do, but they need to do. Nobody wants this fight. Nobody wants to have to go back and rebuild, the destruction that now, is all around Jerusalem. But Nehemiah has been given this vision, right? He has a desire to see God's house rebuilt, that the people being restored, not living under this cloud of disgrace. But notice what else a good leader does. In verse 23, he says, neither I, nor my brothers, nor my men, nor the guards with me. So anybody associated with Nehemiah's administration, he says, none of us, we didn't take our clothes off. Each had his weapon, and even when he went for water. So Nehemiah is putting himself under the same kind of restraints as the people that he is leading. That's a good leader. It's not that he's setting himself apart, but he's throwing himself right there in the midst of it. Well, we're going to stop here today. We'll pick this up again this week. We'll go, like as I said, we're going to go through this Nehemiah as we see these walls being rebuilt. And then we're going to pick it up with Malachi, the last book in our Old Testament. And we will have concluded 18 weeks in our Old Testament study. I hope this has been a blessing to you. It has been for me. and I thoroughly enjoy and missed our time last week. I felt kind of out of sorts. It's like this has become such a pattern for my life that I'm like, I it was just weird to have a morning pass and not spend it with you. So I'm glad I'm back and looking forward, Lord willing, to spending some more time with you again tomorrow. So thanks for joining me on this Friday morning, March 3rd. And hopefully we'll see each other again tomorrow. God bless you, my friends.